Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Michael Brown here in Langley, British Columbia.
And I'm Matthew, texting Olin about how Mike and I want to do River's Edge with him.
River's Edge is one of my favorite Gen X movies. Crispin Glover, Keanu Reeves, etc., etc., etc.
And Mike and I thought it'd be fun for Mike to join me on the Too Old or Pure Gold movie podcast to do that. So I think we'll do that together, Mike.
That sounds like a blast. Make it happen, Oland.
So this one's interesting because this is my hometown area.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you will know about, I hope, anyway.
Yeah.
This is why I like to do shows about things that you're familiar with, so perhaps you can give insights that I wouldn't have dug up.
Or not.
Yeah, or not. Anyway, oh dear.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense, and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
Morning of Tuesday, August 14th, 1934, started like any other for John Sackville Labatt. He was running late. He had a 10:30 meeting in London. His brother Hugh was already there waiting, along with their uncle by marriage, a former federal cabinet minister and decorated army general named Sidney Newburn. Labatt was the president of one of Canada's largest companies. Men like this did not miss appointments. He took a shortcut. Instead of the county road, the one with traffic, he turned onto Edgemont Road, a narrow dirt track cutting through dense forest, barely used, fast if you pushed it. He pushed it, 50 miles per hour, clouds of dust behind his black Rio sedan. A car appeared in the rearview mirror, moving faster than he was. Labatt slowed to let it pass, a Hudson with American plates. When it blew by and disappeared around a bend, he relaxed. He'd been jumpy lately. Police had warned him back in 1930 about kidnapping threats. He'd laughed it off. Dismissed the letters his mother-in-law had begged him for years to be careful. "You are very well off," she told him, and he and Bessie had laughed at that too. The Hudson was gone and he drove on. Then it was there again. Stopped dead in the road ahead of him. He slowed, 30 yards back, 3 men in the car, 1 in the front, 2 behind. The car moved off. Labatt waited, then followed. He didn't know that one of the men had just told the others, "This bastard wants to be taken." He didn't know they'd been watching him for 2 weeks. He didn't know they'd tried to take him the day before and called it off when his dog ran at them in the driveway. At the next crossroads, the Hudson turned around and came straight at him. Labatt stopped. Fearing a collision on the narrow road, he pulled up between 1 and 2 car lengths short. The 3 men jumped out and ran toward his car. One of them reached his driver's door, pulled a revolver, and shouted, "Stick him up quick. This is a kidnapping." John Sackville Labatt, brewer, millionaire, president of one of Canada's most powerful companies, was 53 years old, alone on a dirt road in rural Ontario, and no one knew where he was. You're listening to Dark Poutine episode 427, Three-Fingered Abe, The Kidnapping of John S. Labatt. The brewery that John Labatt ran in 1934 was already nearly 90 years old. The name was on bottles, buildings, and on the tongue of every Londoner who'd ever ordered a beer. It was by any measure one of the most recognized companies in the country. It started with a farm. In 1833, a 30-year-old Irishman named John Kinder Labatt arrived in Upper Canada with his wife Eliza, and they settled south of London, Ontario. He cleared the land and he farmed it. Then in 1847, he made a decision that would shape Canadian brewing for generations. He sold the farm and bought a small brewery near the forks of the Thames River called the London Brewery. By 1855, he owned it outright. When John Kinder died, the business passed on to his son John, father of the man who would one day be kidnapped on a dirt road outside Sarnia. The younger John, trained under an English brewer in West Virginia, came home to London and built the company with the focused aggression of a man who had something to prove. He advertised heavily. He entered trade competitions in the United States. He deliberately designed Labatt's labels to resemble the distinctive red triangle on England's Bass Ale, one of the world's most respected beers, to prompt customers to make the association. He turned down a merger offer from Carling in 1889 and another from O'Keefe in 1898. He had no interest in selling what his father had built.
So I'm just going to do a little shout out to everyone in London, Ontario.
Okay.
I still call the arena the JLC, not the Budweiser Gardens.
Yeah, Budweiser's gross.
Because when it was first built, it was the John Labatt Center.
Yeah.
And now it's Bud Gardens. And I'm like, how dare they? How absolutely dare they? The hometown of Labatt's, and there's a Budweiser Center. No, 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 no.
That's quite a slap in the face, yeah.
Right. But Bass Ale, here's a little fun fact for you, Mike. One of the oldest logos in the world, actually. It's up there, Stella Artois, which is actually the oldest. 1366, the Stella Artois logo was designed.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I know. Isn't that cool?
That logo in beer has been around a long time.
It's like, yeah.
Have they stylized it at all or made any changes?
A few little tweaks, but it's been the same logo since 1366, yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I want to change the Dark Poutine logo every few years. I just recently refreshed it, and I think it looks pretty hot. This one I'm going to stick with for some time to come.
The important thing to remember is you get bored of your logo before consumers do.
Yeah, that's true.
You always clean up, you never change.
Well, that's what I've done. I kept a loon, et cetera, et cetera.
If you decide that you can do a little refresh, but you do not change it, the best logo changes are when people barely even realize that you've changed the logo.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty happy with this new one. Anyway, more about the Labatt's family. In 1911, John, J.S.'s father, incorporated as John Labatt Limited and drew up a will that divided shares equally among his 9 children. His 2 sons, John Sackville and Hugh Francis, would run the company in succession. But they would make no major decisions without the consent of their 7 sisters. It was a family business, and it would stay one. Before we go any further, there's something else in the Labatt family history worth mentioning, something that doesn't appear in most accounts. On September 10th, 1906, Mrs. Sophia A. Labatt, wife of John the brewer, died in London after taking medicine prescribed by her doctor. The prescription had been filled at a local drugstore. A clerk had included strychnine by mistake. The Hamilton Spectator ran the story the following morning under the headline, "Wife of well-known brewer given strychnine by mistake." The report was brief. It didn't name the clerk or the drugstore. Whether an inquest was held or whether anyone faced any consequence, the record does not say. It was reported as an accident. It reminds me of that particular scene from It's a Wonderful Life with Mr. Gower, the druggist, who makes the same kind of mistake. I wonder if this story inspired that one. Anyway, John Sackville Labatt became the president of the company in 1915 following his father's death. Within 2 years, Prohibition arrived. Ontario banned the sale of alcohol in 1916 except for medicinal or scientific use, or for export. The United States followed in 1919 with the 18th Amendment. The company came close to collapse. Competitors made takeover offers. John Sackville turned them all down, the same as his father had, and waited. He waited because there was a loophole. It was legal in Canada to manufacture alcohol for export. What happened to it after it crossed the border was technically someone else's problem. The result was an open secret. Trucks and freight cars loaded with what John's wife Bessie referred to as simply the product rolled out of the Labatt Brewery toward Windsor, bound for the United States. The Canadian government was unable or unwilling to stop it.
Yeah, what fascinates me about this era is how much of Canadian business mythology is built around men who looked respectable in daylight, but operated sort of right beside legally gray economies, I'll call them, at night.
Legally gray, that's good.
Like, it's just incredible. And, I work in the cannabis industry, right? And a lot of people in the cannabis industry came out of when it was illegal.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was okay for them to come out of the shadows.
Right. And because during Prohibition, like entire fortunes were being protected by this polite fiction that everyone involved was somehow not responsible for what happened once the liquor crossed the border. Right. Let's just pretend we're all not responsible for what happens after it crosses the border.
NMFP, not my freaking problem.
Right. And the thing is, criminal networks learn from legitimate businesses as well, right? Logistics and distribution and routes and supply chains. And a lot of men who became kidnappers in the 1930s didn't emerge out of nowhere. There was a spate of kidnapping. Like 30s were like kidnaps. It was like kidnap season, right?
Yeah, it really was. Yeah.
These guys came out of what they had already learned on how do you move contraband, how to avoid authorities, and think risk is just another operating expense. It's fascinating.
Rum-running was good business while it lasted. Then in 1933, U.S. Prohibition ended. The revenue dried up overnight. The men who had made their livings moving liquor across the border were suddenly broke and looking for other ways to make money fast. Some of them knew the brewing industry well. They knew who ran the big companies, and they knew what those men were worth. In 1934, John Labatt Limited was estimated to be worth approximately $5 million. According to Susan Goldberg's research in her book, Snatched, that is equivalent to roughly $68 million today. That number had not gone unnoticed. For someone so wealthy, John Sackville Labatt was not the kind of man who drew attention to himself. He was born in London, Ontario on March 10, 1880. He attended Trinity College School, an exclusive private boys' school in Port Hope, then earned a degree at McGill University, and then studied at the National Brewers Academy in New York City. He joined the family firm as a clerk at 20. By 31, he was vice president. At 35, following his father's death, he was leading the company. By the summer of 1934, he had held that position for 19 years. 5'6" to 5'8" inches tall, depending on the account. He weighed between 165 and 180 pounds. Dark eyes, dark hair, and an unruly lock that tended to fall forward below the brim of his hat. He walked with a cane. A boyhood football injury to his left leg had never properly healed, and the knee stiffened if he kept it bent too long. His doctors had also identified a weak heart. He carried amyl nitrate pills wherever he went in case of emergency. He was known in London as a generous man, quietly so. He did not announce his philanthropy. He sat on boards, supported causes, and showed up. His wife Bessie, Elizabeth Lynch of Ottawa, the 10th of 11 children in a fiercely Irish Catholic family whom he married in 1926 at the age of 46, was the same. She bought rolls of 25-cent Salvation Army tickets and handed them to the unemployed men who found their way to their door during the Depression, men who had ridden the rails into London in search of work. A ticket meant dinner and a bed for the night. John was so generous, she said of her husband. I became generous too. By August 1934, they had 3 children. Jack was 5, Mary was 3, Arthur had been born in May, just 3 months earlier. Bessie was still recovering. John's brother Hugh, 3 years younger, served as vice president and secretary-treasurer of the company. The two were close in temperament, in loyalty, and in appearance. They looked enough alike on the day of the kidnapping, one of the men holding the gun on John Labatt would stop and ask him to confirm he was not Hugh. The police had been warning Labatt about kidnapping threats since 1930, and he dismissed them. Threatening letters arrived, and they were put into the trash bin. He traveled without a bodyguard, without a chauffeur, despite the fact that he could easily have afforded both. In a 1933 incident, Labatt was on his usual evening boat ride on the St. Clair River near Corunna, Ontario. 2 of his children were with him. A high-powered boat, the kind used by rum runners, shot out from the Michigan shore and came straight at his launch. The London Free Press reported that, quote, the maneuver was so suggestive of trouble that Labatt raced for the Canadian side and by a narrow margin reached a place where there were too many people for the apparent kidnapper's nerve, end quote. The Toronto Daily Star told it differently, reporting he was forced to flee to the American shore instead. 2 accounts disagreed on details. They arrived on the outcome. He barely got away from kidnappers. Whether the men in that boat were connected to what happened the following year was never established. The scare was enough to make Labatt change his summer arrangements. In 1934, he rented a house at Bright's Grove on Lake Huron, about 10 miles east of Sarnia, farther from the U.S. border than the year before. He hired guards to protect his children. The 1932 kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh's infant son had settled into his mind and stayed there. But he still drove himself to work, and he was always alone. On the morning of August 14, 1934, Labatt had a 10:30 appointment at the breweries' offices in London. His brother Hugh was already there, along with their uncle, Major General Sidney Mewburn. Mewburn had called ahead that morning to arrange the meeting, and Hugh had called John to confirm he could make it on time. John had said yes. The drive from Bright's Grove to London took just over an hour. Labatt left late, and he never explained why. It was on that drive that John S. Labatt was pulled over and kidnapped. One of the kidnappers produced a pencil and a writing pad and told him to write. Labatt later testified that his hand was steady. Most people in that situation would be shaking, but he wrote clearly in firm handwriting exactly what was dictated to him. Quote, August 14, 1934. Dear Hugh, do as these men have instructed you to and don't go to the police. They promise not to harm me if you negotiate with them. Your affectionate brother, John S. Labatt. End quote. On the back of the same piece of paper, one of the men printed a second message in crude block letters. It read, We are holding your brother John for $150,000 ransom. Go to Toronto immediately and register in the Royal York Hotel. We will negotiate with you from that point. Be prepared when I get in touch with you there to furnish me the names of 2 or 3 reliable parties who you can trust to deliver this money to us. We advise you to keep this matter away from the police and newspapers so as we can return your brother safely. You will know me as Three-Fingered Abe, end quote. $150,000 was a lot of money in 1934. A man's suit only cost $21.50. The demand was triple what Charles Lindbergh had paid 2 years earlier for the return of his kidnapped son, who was found murdered anyway. One of the men got into Labatt's car and drove it toward London, where it would be left at St. Joseph's Hospital with the note tucked under the front seat. An anonymous call would direct Hugh to it. Labatt's eyes were sealed with pink adhesive tape and covered with blacked-out goggles. He was put in the back seat of the Hudson, a gun pressed against his side. His hands were not bound, and he was not gagged. The car turned north, not south toward Windsor, not west toward the American border, north into cottage country, into the lakes and forests of Muskoka, where summer tourists from the United States were ordinary enough that American accents drew no attention. During the long drive, his captor, who told Labatt to call him Charlie, was talkative, almost cheerful. He told Labatt they hoped to have the whole thing wrapped up in 24 hours. He asked whether the brewery still had as much money as it did 3 years ago. When Labatt mentioned the Depression had taken its toll, Charlie shrugged, but seemed satisfied with that. He asked Labatt how much cash he had on him. Labatt handed over $99 in bills. Charlie told him to keep the coins. How noble. They stopped 3 times along the way for gas, for groceries, and meat. At one stop, one of the men overheard a mention of a country constable on the back road and bolted back to the car. They drove on. Labatt said nothing at any of the stops. He explained later, quote, "The kidnappers were armed, but the gasoline attendant, shop owners, and myself were not, and we could have suffered physical harm if I'd cried out for help," end quote. By the time they arrived at their destination, a small rented cottage in the woods, accessible only by a rutted mile-long track through dense brush, it was evening. Children were playing at a nearby cottage. Someone on the lake was strumming a mandolin. Labatt was led inside. His clothes were taken. His right wrist was chained to a cot with a dog leash. After the break, the ransom demand lands in Hugh's hands. Police flood southern Ontario, and the press, despite everyone's best efforts, blows the story wide open within hours. But as thousands of officers search in the wrong direction, John Labatt sits blindfolded in a cottage surrounded by the sounds of other people's summer holidays. And somewhere in Toronto, a man checks into a luxury hotel under a false name, sits down to dinner in the dining room, and finds himself sharing a table with a stranger who has no idea he's eating with one of the most wanted men in Canada. And we'll be right back. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts on the halfway point of this one?
Yeah, I was thinking about how profoundly unprepared Canada was psychologically for this sort of crime.
Interesting. Okay.
Because Americans already had gangster mythology, right? Dillinger and Capone and kidnappings and bank robberies. And we did too, but not as much, right? And Tommy guns, and that imagery already exists in the public imagination in the U.S. But in Canada, like we always thought of ourselves, a little bit quieter, a little bit safer, a little bit more orderly.
More polite.
And then suddenly one of the countries, think of like the equivalent of who this would be today in Canada.
Jimmy Pattison, maybe?
Or the dude who owns Loblaws, or,
Lululemon douche canoe, Chip Wilson.
Yeah. It'd be like a big industrial, like important, business person being taken in broad daylight, right? And this wasn't Chicago, and this wasn't New York. This is like just outside of London, rural Ontario. And it's funny because that road is right up near the old Labatt Mansion, actually. So the Labatt Mansion was on this hill. We used to call it Catastrophe Corner or something because there's so many accidents. And now, what's really sad though, so it was on this hill. And when I was young, you could see like the cattle grazing in front of the mansion. But now it's like a strip mall.
Oh, dear.
Right? So Labatt Mansion sits over like a Taco Bell or something. It's really sad.
Ew.
What strikes me is how quickly everybody starts grasping for certainty afterward here. The police become convinced that the kidnappers went south. Newspapers build narratives immediately, right? It's so funny. Like, everyone jumps on this, right? Everyone has a theory from day one. And that part feels like really quite modern because we still do this constantly. Like, one story feels emotionally complete. Once the story feels emotionally complete, people actually stop questioning whether or not it's true. People just jump on bandwagons so easily, don't they, Mike? And we're going to see that here, right?
Yep, we definitely are.
Meanwhile, the kidnappers are in cottage country listening to loons and mandolins. And this whole thing feels like a Coen Brothers movie to me.
Yep, me too. Exactly. Like Miller's Crossing or something.
I love a good kidnapping where nobody gets hurt, especially when it's like a rich person kidnapping, because they're just fascinating, right?
Well, we covered one before, yeah.
You know what we have to do? We have to find like a Canadian connection to Patty Hearst and do that story sometime.
Patty Hearst is actually already on my list. We'll do it as a road trip.
Yeah.
John was already 2 hours late for the morning meeting at the brewery. Mewburn and Hugh assumed John had been delayed and decided to postpone the meeting. He went back to his apartment at 860 Waterloo Street. Hugh had just washed his hands for lunch when the phone rang. The voice on the line told Hugh that his brother's car was parked at St. Joseph's Hospital with a note under the front seat that needed to be acted on immediately. When Hugh threatened to hang up and call the police, the voice told him to cool down. After all, it said, "We have your brother kidnapped." Hugh asked who was calling. "Three-fingered Abe," the voice said. Then it hung up. Hugh went to the living room where Mewburn was waiting. Mewburn called the police before Hugh had finished telling him what had happened. They drove to St. Joseph's Hospital and met Inspector of Detectives Thomas Bolton beside John Labatt's dust-coated black Rio sedan. Bolton searched the car and found the note under the front seat. There was handwriting on one side, a letter in John Labatt's hand, firm and clear, telling Hugh to cooperate and not to go to the police. Bolton turned the paper over, and on the back, printed in crude block letters, was the ransom demand. $150,000, go to Toronto, the Royal York Hotel, no police, no newspapers. You will know me as Three-Fingered Abe. Bolton contacted his office immediately. The manhunt began. Within hours, Ontario Attorney General Arthur Roebuck had pledged that every available resource in the province would be directed at the case. Premier Mitchell Hepburn, 38 years old, the youngest premier in Canada, ordered all provincial police forces into action and cancelled holiday leave. Roadblocks went up across Sarnia. The bridges and ferries to the United States were placed under watch. Every farmhouse, gas station, and highway junction between Brights Grove and London was searched. The police were looking south and west toward the American border. That was where gangsters ran. That's where the rum-runners had operated. That was the logical direction, but they'd guessed wrong. As we know, the kidnappers had gone north. Labatt's car was dusted for prints. A forensic examiner lifted one clear fingerprint that hadn't been left by Labatt. Police on both sides of the border ran it through their files. Eyewitness accounts poured in and contradicted each other. A woman on Egremont Road reported 3 cars racing down the road when there had been 2. A service station worker gave a precise account that didn't match hers. Both leads had to be run down before investigators could determine which, if either, was worth following. The news blackout lasted less than a day. An anonymous caller tipped the London Free Press, and the paper put it on the front page that same evening in type normally reserved for declarations of war. Telegraph offices in London brought in extra staff to handle the volume of outgoing dispatches. By the following morning, it was the lead story in the New York Times with a 6-tier headline across the top of page 1. The electronic message board above the Times building in Times Square displayed the news in 5-foot letters. The Times of London ran it on its foreign news page. It was, the New York paper noted, the first kidnapping of its kind in Canadian history. A second note surfaced, addressed directly to the family. It read, quote, "If you guys don't shut up the newspapers so Ransom Man and gang can work, it will be too bad. Remember, no moves in the papers after Friday. Put yourself in this position." End quote. The papers did not shut up.
Of course they didn't. That's not what papers are meant to do, right?
Silence and not sharing information does not sell newspapers.
Yeah, and the relationship between crime and media changes permanently around stories like this, because once newspapers realize fear sells nationally, the story stops belonging to the victim's family or to the police, and it starts to become public entertainment.
Yep.
And theater. You can feel the tension in this case between journalism as information and journalism as escalation.
Yep, definitely.
Right? And every headline, can you imagine? Every headline would increase that pressure, and every detail potentially changes the kidnapper's behavior. But no paper wants to be the one that backs off while everyone else is printing the biggest story in the country, right? It's just not going to happen. Oh, we're going to be responsible and not sell newspapers and let the competitors do it. It's never, ever, ever going to happen.
Sadly, as long as news isn't for the people and driven by sales of something or other, then, yep, that's the way it's going to be. Hugh did as he was told. He checked into the Royal York as instructed. Police sealed the corridor to his room and tapped the phone lines. Hugh refused to leave the room or eat and asked the hotel barber to come to him. He paced the room. A persistent reporter who managed to get past the police cordon knocked on the door. Hugh told him that the paper's continued interest in the story was making it difficult for him. Bessie, 3 months out from giving birth, was moved with the children to Hugh's London apartment. She called her mother in Ottawa and told her she was keeping up for the sake of the children. Labatt's 72-year-old father-in-law sat by his phone in Ottawa, telling reporters he had no idea where John was or whether he was safe, and asking if anyone else did. Back in Muskoka, John Labatt continued to hear children playing at a cottage nearby. A boat passed on the lake. A loon called. He said nothing. His captor, Charlie, shaved him each morning, bathed his eyes where the tape had irritated the skin, and brought him food and cigarettes. When Labatt asked whether he would be shot in his sleep, Charlie told him no. Labatt took him at his word and went to sleep. Thursday morning, a call came through to the Royal York. Someone claiming to represent the kidnappers said Hugh was to drop the money at the Humber River Bridge. Hugh stalled as police traced the call to a service station and found a young man who had nothing to do with the kidnapping trying to turn the crisis into cash. The real gang was somewhere else, and something had gone wrong. The driver, the man who had been sent to Toronto to collect the ransom, had taken the car and disappeared. He didn't come back. He had not met with Hugh and hadn't picked up the ransom. The two men left in the Muskoka cottage were stranded with their hostage without a vehicle, and police were swarming across southern Ontario looking for them, although in entirely the wrong direction. They borrowed a car from a local contact who didn't ask questions. Then they made a decision that no one who studies this case has ever fully explained. They drove John Labatt to Toronto and let him go without ever receiving their ransom. 63 hours of planning and captivity, $700 in expenses, and they walked away with $99 from John Labatt's wallet. At around midnight on August 17th, the car stopped at the corner of St. Clair Avenue and Vaughan Road in Toronto, and Labatt was helped out. The adhesive tape was still over his eyes. His own glasses were handed back to him. He was told not to remove the tape until the car had driven away. One of the men handed him a single-dollar bill cab fare out of the 99 they had taken and pointed him in the direction of the city. Then they were gone. Labatt peeled off the tape from his eyes and made his way along St. Clair Avenue to Bathurst Street and hailed a cab. The driver didn't recognize him, despite his face being on the front page of every newspaper in Canada and the U.S. for 3 days straight. At 12:55 a.m., John Labatt walked into the lobby of the Royal York Hotel. He walked past the crowd of police officers and reporters stationed there and approached the front desk. He asked the night clerk where his brother's room was. Hugh came down to meet him. He was taken up in the freight elevator. Both men were exhausted. John from 63 hours of captivity and Hugh from 63 hours of not knowing whether his brother was alive. They didn't stay long. Within the hour, John, Hugh, and the family lawyer Richard Ivey slipped out the back of the hotel and drove to London. They believed they had avoided the press. They were wrong. The London Free Press had already gone to print with a one-line bulletin. Labatt is reported released. At 3:45 in the morning, they pulled up to Hugh's apartment on Waterloo Street, where Bessie was waiting. John Labatt's physician arrived and examined him. He reported that Labatt had suffered a nervous collapse but was otherwise rational, his heart intact, his eyes inflamed from days under the tape. The doctor ordered John to rest. Attorney General Roebuck was less gentle. The family had left Toronto without notifying police, he said publicly, destroying any chance of a fresh trail. His statements read in part, quote, "It is most unfortunate and unnecessary that the police forces of both the province and the city have been very seriously handicapped in their work by the inability to secure complete control of the situation." End quote. The Border City Star's front page that morning carried the headline, "Expect Labatt arrest soon. Insist that no ransom paid." Labatt himself said nothing publicly. When reporters turned to his lawyer Richard Ivey for comment, Ivey asked them a quiet question in return. "If you were confronted with something that put your family's lives at risk, what would you do?" He answered it himself. "You would probably keep quiet." The kidnappers were still out there. The police had no leads. And the public, gripped by the biggest crime story in Canadian history, wanted answers. What came next was not what anyone expected. Police had almost nothing to go on. The fingerprint lifted from Labatt's car matched no one in the files. Labatt had seen his captors' faces on Egremont Road, and they'd made no effort to cover them at that point, which was unusual. But 63 hours of being blindfolded and the stress of being kidnapped scrambled John Labatt's memory. In September 1934, police obtained mugshot books from Detroit and Michigan law enforcement and showed roughly 40 photographs to John Labatt. He picked out two men. One he identified as the driver. The other, he said, was the gang's leader, the man who had been his chief guard throughout his captivity. The second photograph was of a man named David Meisner. He was 55 years old, small and frail, a small-time Kentucky gambler and racetrack follower. He had a pronounced cataract clouding his left eye, visible to anyone who looked at him, and he had never set foot in Canada. Meisner had been invited to a planning meeting for the kidnapping earlier that year. He'd refused to participate, packed his bag, and gone home. He assumed that was the end of it. When his photograph appeared in newspapers as a wanted man, he voluntarily walked into a Detroit police station and surrendered. He was confident. He told reporters he had been in Covington, Kentucky, the entire month of August and had witnesses to prove it, including, he said, police officers who could place him there every single day. Meisner was extradited to Canada. The identification lineup was held in the yard of the Middlesex County Jail in London. The stand-ins were other prisoners dressed in civilian clothes pulled from the storage bags where inmates' belongings are kept on admission. Their clothes were wrinkled and ill-fitting, the clothes of men who looked like they lived in jail. Meisner stood out among them in his own suit, freshly pressed. Defense lawyer Charles Bell would later argue in his published memoir that this violated the most basic principles of lineup procedure, that Scotland Yard's own written regulations required all participants to be dressed in clothing of similar appearance so that witnesses were identifying a face, not simply picking out whoever looked different from the rest. Every eyewitness picked Meisner. In January 1935, Canada's first kidnapping trial opened in London, Ontario. Meisner looked ill. The cataract over his left eye caught the light across the courtroom. He was charged with kidnapping, armed robbery, and unlawful confinement. John Labatt took the stand and identified Meisner as his chief captor. He said he would never forget the face of the man who had held him. He did not mention the cataract. Meisner's defense counsel, Charles Bell, was the most celebrated criminal defense lawyer in Canada and he was a man who had never lost a murder case. Bell hammered the identification. He pointed at the cataract. He pointed at the Royal York Hotel as a ransom exchange point and asked the jury whether any serious kidnapper would arrange a handoff at the largest hotel in the British Empire. He called 2 Kentucky police detectives to testify that Meisner had never left Covington in August of 1934. Those 2 detectives fled the country in the middle of the trial for reasons known only to them. They were across the U.S. border before anyone could stop them. The jury deliberated for an hour, guilty on all 3 counts, 15 years in Kingston Penitentiary. From his cell, Meisner wrote to Bell, quote, "I am innocent, regardless of the evidence produced," end quote. He was being honest. The men who had actually taken John Labatt from Egremont Road were identified one by one over the following year.
This is what really stays with me. People tend to imagine that wrongful convictions happen because somebody lied.
Right.
But often they happen because people are sincere.
Interestingly, yeah.
Like Labatt genuinely believed Meisner was the man. The witnesses believed it. The jury believed it. Nobody was going, ha, 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 we're going to lie, right?
Yeah, right.
There was sincerity there. There was absolute sincerity there. And memory is not a recording device. It's reconstruction.
Yep.
Right? Especially after trauma. And once police place somebody inside the frame of guilt, human beings become incredibly good at unconsciously editing uncertainty out of their own minds.
Yeah, totally.
That's what makes mistaken identity cases so frightening, because nobody has to be evil for somebody innocent to lose years of their life. They just have to be mistaken.
As Labatt was.
Earnestly mistaken.
Yep. The real ringleader was a man named Michael McArdle. He was 42 years old and had been born in a small village near Stratford, Ontario. He had left Canada at 16 and spent decades moving through the American underworld, railroad work, a gambling house in Alabama, then Chicago in the early 1930s. He was talkative, wisecracking, and considered himself a criminal mastermind. His partner, Russell Knowles, 40, lived in Detroit and described himself as a former advertising man who had dabbled in what he called the liquor business. The driver, Albert Pegram, was heavyset and silent, recruited specifically for his skills behind the wheel. A 4th man, Jack Bannon, a Windsor rum runner who moonlighted as a police informant, had helped plan the kidnapping but was not on Egremont Road the morning it happened. They'd been planning to take Labatt for 3 years. They had held off because they knew about his weak heart and were afraid he might die in captivity. At one point, McArdle had redirected his attention to Montreal distiller Samuel Bronfman. That plot collapsed at a pre-victory party when a drunk accomplice impersonated a police officer and got himself arrested. McArdle then came back to Labatt as their target. In June 1934, he called a planning meeting at a Detroit hotel. He invited David Meisner, describing it as a business proposition. Meisner refused, packed his bag, and went home. He told no one what had been discussed. 6 weeks later, McArdle, Knowles, Pegram, and Bannon spent 2 weeks in London watching Labatt. They tried to take him the day before and called it off when his dog ran at them. The next morning, they were on Egremont Road.
There's something unsettling about how ordinary all of this is right before it happens. So the way you've set up this story, you've painted a really good picture, a late morning, a familiar road, a man thinking about a meeting.
Yep, more or less ordinary stuff.
And most life-changing events happen this way. They don't, we always think there's going to be a drum roll before something dramatic happens to us, right? Right? But they don't. And kidnappings in the 1930s especially seem to terrify people because they violated the very modern idea that wealth created safety.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, wealth creates visibility, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody knows your name, your routines, your car, where your children sleep. And the richer and more recognizable and more famous you are, right, the easier you become to study.
Yeah, there was that young man who for a while, I don't know if he still has it, but had a Twitter account that would put out wherever Elon Musk's plane was going, for example. But just recently I noticed that the BC Lotto Corporation is no longer requiring people publish their last names, just their first names, if they win a big lotto. So I have a sneaking suspicion that that is for safety. But yeah, you pointed out before we started this why you think the names are published, and I agree.
So people know that people actually win. It was actually built in to go, real people are actually winning. This is not a scam.
I've heard people say, yeah, nobody actually wins the lottery. But they do. In Nova Scotia, we used to say, oh, it's someone from Ontario. And here in BC, we always say, oh, it's someone from Ontario.
People don't understand statistics, do they?
No, I don't think the average person does. No.
Nobody ever wins from British Oh, my God.
I just saw a big winner the other day, $75 million here in BC. Anyway, that'd keep Dark Poutine going. It didn't take long before the cops caught up with the real bad guys. McArdle was eventually run to ground in Calumet, Michigan, after a confrontation with police left him with a gunshot wound and a missing finger. I guess the old three-fingered Abe thing was a self-fulfilling prophecy. McArdle did escape and checked into a hospital under the name James Parker. Jack Bannon, accomplice and always alert to where the money was, identified Parker as McArdle to investigators and collected part of the reward. On July 25th, 1935, Labatt was brought to the jail in Crown Point, Indiana. McArdle looked up and said, "Hello, John." Labatt confirmed the identification. Then McArdle confirmed something that had been true for over a year and that he had done nothing to act on while an innocent man sat in Kingston Pen. He said David Meisner had nothing to do with the kidnapping. Meisner had walked out of the planning meeting and never come back. The man who stood wrongly convicted, McArdle said, was innocent. McArdle pled guilty and received 12 years, 3 fewer than his co-conspirators, in exchange for his plea and testimony against Bannon, who'd ratted him out. Bannon's trial ran in October 1935. McArdle testified against him, and the jury found Bannon guilty of kidnapping and robbery. Justice McFarland, the same judge who had presided over Meisner's trial, sentenced him to 15 years and told him he had nothing further to say to him. Russell Knowles was the last to be tried. He sat in the dock and told the court the entire kidnapping had been a staged publicity stunt arranged by the Labatt Brewery itself. The jury deliberated and returned a guilty verdict on all counts. 15 years. The judge told the jury their verdict was a complete vindication of John Labatt and that the rumors of sinister involvement on Labatt's part were, he hoped, put to rest for good. One day after Knowles was convicted, Federal Minister of Justice Ernest Lapointe ordered a new trial for David Meisner. This, the first time in Canadian history a retrial had been granted on grounds of a possible mistaken identity in a serious criminal case. At the retrial, John Labatt took the stand on Meisner's behalf. He had been wrong, he said. He said so plainly. McArdle testified again that Meisner had never been a part of it. After 7 hours, the jury came back not guilty. Meisner had been in Kingston Penitentiary for 15 months. Meisner told reporters he felt like he was dancing on air. He later sued Labatt for malicious prosecution, and the case settled for $5,500. Albert Pegram, the driver who had taken the car and stranded his partner, was never found. In October 1935, his wife quietly left their Detroit home, and neither of them was ever seen again. The case never fully closed. Bannon and Knowles were released in 1943, halfway through their sentences. Shortly afterward, Labatt began receiving threats and mysterious long-distance calls from the Boston area. A government memorandum that year described him as living in a state of nervous apprehension, afraid for himself and his family. McArdle died of cancer in 1950 while working as a janitor in a Windsor pool hall. He was given a pauper's funeral. John Labatt remained president of the brewery until 1950 when Hugh took over. The Canadian Encyclopedia describes the kidnapping's effect on him simply. It made him apprehensive and defensive. He withdrew. He depended on others in ways he had not before. He died on July 8, 1952, of a heart attack at his summer home in Port Stanley on Lake Erie. He was 72 years old, 18 years and nearly 1 month after the morning on Egremont Road. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 427, Three-Fingered Abe, the kidnapping of John S. Labatt. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. Alrighty, we have a couple of voicemails. Matthew and I had a really good discussion last time we recorded, and I have been recording week to week forever. So I have this, as we know, some people just can't break out of a habit very easily.
Until Matthew says, hey, why are we doing it like this?
Why are we doing it this way? And so now I think, wonderful, let's do it this way. So you're going to start to hear your voicemails and your donut money donations, Patreon, all that kind of stuff.
Way sooner.
A little earlier than I thought I had to do it. My brain just doesn't work so good sometimes. So
No, it works different, Mike.
It works different, yeah. So I'm going to have to go back and pull things out of different places. But it's fine. It's fine. We can do it. We'll just be more efficient moving forward. So let's listen to some voicemails.
Good morning, Mike and Matthew. This is Tara, and I am calling from beautiful North Bay, Ontario, having just listened to your episode about the Dion Quints. And I have to say, it was finally the push I needed to give you guys a call. I've been telling myself that I would call in for a couple of years now, and here we are with my first time call. So I was inspired because this one literally hits close to home, given that I live just adjacent to Corbeil, and actually lived in Corbeil for quite some time myself. And I will just say the part that tickled me the very most was just hearing Mike pronounce the name of the adjacent town so hilariously. You're overcomplicating it, Mike. It's just Calendar. I can't even remember how you placed the inflection, but it made me giggle every time it came up in the cast. So, Calendar, Ontario, right next to Corbeil. I can remember that one forever because ever since I've lived here, it has screwed me up with the spelling of the actual word calendar because the spelling of the town calendar is so bizarre. Anyhow, thank you for all that you do. You guys are awesome. I've never been inspired to reach out to a random stranger before, and quite frankly, I hate speaking on the phone, so that speaks volumes. So thanks for continuing to do what you do. Look forward to the next episode, and I can't wait to hear what you think I do. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Tara. And we're not strangers. We're listeners, and Mike and we're all family.
Right. And I try so hard to pronounce these
really?
name places. No, I really do. I listen to, if I have a question about the way a place is pronounced, I listen to all these pronunciations in news and all that kind of stuff, and I pick the most consistent one. And often it's the wrong. It's absolutely wrong. So Calendar, which is fine. So, well, okay. People of Calendar, I'm sorry. But Tara, you did come off very erudite, and let's say it sounds like you have discussions with people more than I do. So
you give good voicemail.
Yeah, it was a great voicemail. So what do you think Tara does there, Matthew?
Bjork Fan Club President, Canadian Chapter.
Bjork.
And then I put my knickers in the oven and I turned it on.
I don't know why, but I'm going to give her the job of Bjork fan club president.
Absolutely.
Canadian chapter.
I love Bjork. Bjork is she is a spark plug. Just so creative and so, you think she's going to go in one direction with what she's doing, and then pew, she veers off into something completely different.
She does what she wants, and like commercial success or not, be damned. She's creative. She's a truly creative person, right?
She even punched somebody who was taking pictures of her kid. So
in Japan, yeah.
Anyway, here's another voicemail.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. My name is Lauren. I'm calling from Winnipeg. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I first found your podcast years ago about one of the, I forget the name now. Anyway, I'm just calling because it's Canada Day, and I noticed you just did a podcast about the Dion quintuplets. And I think years ago on Facebook group, I mentioned that to do as a podcast, and thank you so much. I really liked the story and was really into it when I was 10, and I'm 41 now, so I'm really glad you covered it. It's a really interesting, dark side of our history. So thanks, and thanks for all you do. I love hearing you guys talk every week, and go take a poop in your toque. Thanks, bye.
So Lauren called back, and she wanted to tell us about the first episode that she had listened to, and it was actually Michael Dunnihy that she was mentioning. So,
okay.
Of course, yeah. And that's a story about a little fella, 4 years old, who went missing on the island, on Vancouver Island. It's a very sad tale. Anyway, Matthew, what do you think Lauren does there in Winnipeg?
She's an experienced commercial roofing foreman.
An experienced commercial roofing foreman. Okay.
Or four-person.
Right? Yeah, I was going to say, we don't want to go there. So, okay. So a 4-person for a commercial roofing company.
You're like, okay.
And why did you come up with that? Does Lauren sound like she, throws a hammer all day long, or?
Yeah, it sounds like she can lead crews on flat roofing projects throughout Canada pretty well.
Okay, well, there you go.
And I think, I think there's a skilled workforce in Winnipeg of those people, and she sounds like a leader. So there you go.
Does she have any hobbies?
Roofing.
So roofing is her hobby too.
She's dedicated, man.
A lot of people have special interests, and maybe roofing is Lauren's special interest. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Lauren, for keeping those roofs from leaking in Winnipeg and nationally.
There you go. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. We do have a donut money donor, and the person didn't leave their name, but I see an email. I'm not going to say their last name because they may not be comfortable.
Okay.
But on Buy Me a Coffee, that person, who I assume their first name is Jill, left us $100.
Thank you, Jill.
I was just blown away, and that more than doubles. So essentially, all the other people who have donated, it more than doubles what we've.
But everyone counts.
Oh yeah, absolutely it does. But that's a big special thank you to Jill.
Jill is a well-known underwater stunt coordinator.
Oh, well, where does Jill hail from, Matthew?
Saskatoon.
So an underwater stunt coordinator from Saskatoon. That can't be a real thing.
Well, funnily enough, Michael.
Yes.
I was recording my other show this morning, the Too Old or Pure Gold movie podcast, and we had Kirk Kroc, who is from Saskatchewan, who is a free diver and was the underwater stunt coordinator on Avatar and Wakanda Forever and some other movies. And we covered The Abyss. And I thought, Jill is the same thing.
Okay, well, there you go. Thank you, Jill. And, if you're are you free diving into mud puddles in Saskatoon?
Well, I asked him, right? And then I also said, when the director wants you to do your job, does he yell, "Release the Kraken"? Because the last name's Croc. But there are lots of lakes, and his family had little sailboat, and he got scuba lessons for his 14th birthday and fell in love with it. And it's been his entire career.
Well, there you go. That's kind of cool.
Great guy as well. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So thank you, Jill, for keeping the Hollywood stars safe underwater.
And for helping us to stay afloat.
And for helping us to stay afloat. That was a good one, Mike. Lovely.
Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Keep roofing and stunt coordinating.
Yeah, do what you do. Okay, bye-bye.